June 18th, 1815. The London Stock Exchange. Napoleon had just been defeated, but no one knew yet. Traders were panicking, selling everything they had. The floor was chaos, men screaming, prices collapsing, fortunes disappearing in minutes. One man stood still. He wasn't selling, he was buying. His name was Nathan Rothschild, and what he did that morning wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It was information. The kind of information that governments would kill for. The kind that arrives before the cannons go silent. When information becomes a weapon, one man knew exactly how to pull the trigger and laid the foundation for the most powerful financial dynasty in human history. To understand what Nathan Rothschild did that morning, you first have to understand the world he lived in. In 1815, information was the most valuable commodity on Earth. Not gold, not land. Information. There were no telegraphs, no telephones. If a battle ended in Belgium, London might not hear about it for 2, 3, sometimes 4 days. Longer if the weather turned against the ships crossing the channel. An empire's fate could be decided on a Tuesday, and its own capital wouldn't know until Friday. In this world, the man who received news first didn't just have an advantage. He had a superpower. The London Stock Exchange was a place built entirely on uncertainty. Prices moved on rumors. Fortunes rose and fell on whispers. Every trader in that building was betting on things they didn't fully know. This was the arena Nathan Rothschild had chosen. Not by accident, by design. He was born in 1777 in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto, a cramped, walled enclave called the Judengasse, the street of Jews. His father, Meyer Amschel Rothschild, understood something clearly. In a world that denied Jews land and titles, money was the only form of power available to them. Meyer Amschel had 5 sons. He sent each to a different European city, one to Vienna, one to Naples, one to Paris, one to Frankfurt. And the third, the one with the sharpest instincts and the most ferocious appetite for risk, to London. That was Nathan. He arrived in England in 1798, 20 years old. He spoke almost no English. Within a decade, he had become one of the most important traders in Manchester. Then he moved to London and turned his attention to something bigger. Government bonds, war financing, the invisible machinery that kept armies in the field. He was not a man who inspired warmth. Those who met him described a blunt, forceful presence. He didn't flatter, he didn't charm. He calculated. But he had one quality that separated him from every other banker in Europe. A private intelligence network, unlike anything that existed at the time. Couriers, agents, ships on standby. A system so fast and so reliable that it consistently delivered news to the Rothschilds before it reached governments. In a world that ran on information and ran slowly, Nathan Rothschild ran faster than anyone. By the summer of 1815, Europe had been at war for over 20 years. Napoleon had been exiled to Elba in 1814. The continent exhaled, but the relief lasted less than a year. In March 1815, he escaped. He marched back into France. His old soldiers flocked to him. What followed became known as the 100 Days, a final, desperate campaign. The decisive moment came near a small Belgian village called Waterloo. Napoleon's Armée du Nord, around 72,000 men, faced the Duke of Wellington's coalition forces, with the Prussian army of Field Marshal Blücher racing to arrive in time. The financial markets were watching. Everything hung in the balance. If Napoleon won, Britain faced a catastrophic war. Bond prices, government debt, the financial backbone of the state, would collapse. If Wellington won, the war was over. Stability returns, bonds recover. London didn't know which way it would go. Nobody did. Except, possibly, one man. This is the part of the story that has been debated, embellished, and mythologized for 2 centuries. So let's separate what we know from what we believe. What we know. Nathan Rothschild received news of Wellington's victory before the British government did. This is not disputed. Contemporary accounts confirm it. The margin, somewhere between several hours and a full day. One day. In the world of 1815, one day was an eternity. The Rothschild family had spent decades building what was, in essence, a private postal service. Dedicated couriers, reliable ship captains, men who understood that speed was the only product they were selling. On the night of June 18th, a Rothschild agent was present near the battlefield. When Wellington's lines held and Napoleon's army began to break, this man didn't wait. He didn't celebrate. He rode straight to the coast, across the channel, through the night. And on the morning of June 20th, Nathan Rothschild received a piece of paper that told him the war was over. The official government dispatch wouldn't arrive until the following night. Now, here is where history and legend begin to blur, and where the story becomes something else entirely. What happened next on the floor of the exchange has never been fully proven, but it has never been fully dismissed either. Nathan walked to his usual pillar, the one everyone knew, the one traders watched the way sailors watch a lighthouse. And he began to sell. Not quickly, not frantically, calmly, methodically, bond after bond. The floor noticed. It always noticed Rothschild, and the interpretation was immediate. If he's selling, something is wrong. If Nathan Rothschild is getting out, Napoleon must have won. Panic spread like fire across dry wood. Men who had held their nerve for days began selling. Prices collapsed. Fortunes that had taken years to build evaporated in minutes. And somewhere in that chaos, through agents positioned across the floor, faces no one connected to Rothschild, the buying began. Quietly, steadily. Everything the market was desperate to unload. Then the official dispatch arrived. Wellington had won. Napoleon was finished. The war, 20 years of war, was over. Bond prices reversed, then surged, then kept climbing. And Nathan Rothschild, standing at his pillar, said nothing. He didn't need to. Let's be precise about the numbers, because they matter. British government bonds, known as consols, were the benchmark of financial stability. Before Waterloo, uncertainty had driven prices down. Nobody knew if Britain would be dragged into a prolonged war. When Rothschild moved, the market followed. He was that significant a figure. His actions were read like signals. Contemporary estimates put his gain from this period at somewhere between £600,000 and £1 million. Adjusted for today, somewhere between $1 and $2 billion, made on a single piece of information. But here is what most retellings miss. Waterloo was not just a trade. It was a demonstration. It proved that the Rothschild intelligence network was worth more than any single investment. That architecture, couriers, agents, ships, trust, was a structural advantage no competitor could easily replicate. Nathan Rothschild hadn't just made money at Waterloo. He had revealed the blueprint for a dynasty. The story spread quickly, and as stories do, it grew. In the years following Waterloo, the Rothschild Bank became the dominant force in European government finance. They financed post-war reconstruction. They became the primary lenders to the British Crown, to the Austrian Empire, to the Prussian state. But the legend carried a darker weight. Anti-Semitic pamphlets began circulating across Europe. Crude illustrations of Nathan at the exchange, growing rich while soldiers died. The myth that Jews controlled financial markets, that they profited from Christian suffering, found in Waterloo a story it could attach itself to. This is a pattern that repeats throughout financial history. The man who profits from a moment of collective panic is rarely celebrated. He is resented. Nathan Rothschild knew this. He was not a man who sought affection. He sought position. By the time of his death in 1836, his family sat at the center of European power, not through titles, not through armies, through money, through information, through the understanding that in the modern world, the fastest mind wins. Meyer Amschel's original plan had been operating for years, but after 1815, it became something more than a business strategy. It became a model for how power could operate in the modern world. Nathan in London, Amschel in Frankfurt, Solomon in Vienna, Carl in Naples, James in Paris. 5 branches, 1 family, 1 set of interests. They communicated in a private code using their Courier network. Capital moved across borders at a speed that astonished governments and outpaced every competitor. They financed railways, governments, the British government's compensation scheme for the abolition of slavery in 1835, and later, the Suez Canal. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschild family controlled the largest private fortune in the world, a transnational financial network that operated by its own logic and answered, ultimately, to no single government. All of it traceable, in some form, to one morning in June 1815. One man, one piece of information, one decision. Nathan Rothschild died in 1836, 58 years old. At the time of his death, his bank was the most powerful private financial institution in the world. He left behind no memoir, no philosophy. What he left was a structure, an architecture of money and information that his descendants would operate for generations. Markets are not rational. They are collections of human beings making decisions under uncertainty. The person who can reduce that uncertainty, even slightly, even for a moment, holds an advantage over everyone else in the room. Nathan Rothschild didn't invent that principle, but he executed it at a scale no one before him had managed. Was he a genius? Almost certainly. Was he ruthless? Without question. Did he break any law? By the standards of his time, no. There were no insider trading rules, no regulators. The world had one rule. If you know something the market doesn't, you use it. Great fortunes are rarely built in comfort. They are built in the space between what is legal and what is fair, between what is permitted and what is possible. Nathan Rothschild lived in that space, and he built an empire there. Every fortune has a price. What do you think? Was Nathan Rothschild a visionary who simply understood the world better than everyone around him? Or did he build his empire by exploiting a moment when ordinary people had no chance to compete? I tried to tell this story without taking sides, but I'd love to hear your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Golden Ruin. Every Friday we tell another one, the financial moves that shaped history, and the men who paid the price. I'll see you next week.